Hello and welcome. So, I'm just going to be frank and say that this whole legacy thing will not bring back pre-EoC combat. Let's not pretend that it will, because the entire goal of this, and they've even said this too, if you read through the FAQ, is that legacy mode is to make it look like EoC isn't there. It's still going to be there, they're just going to make the EoC portion of the game as transparent as possible, so that you won't notice it. What that means is one of two things. Your character will still be using abilities, it's just that you won't be clicking it, or they're just going to buff your auto attack damage. Those are the two. They're the two more easier decisions to make when making legacy mode. Now, that's not to say that this won't appeal to anybody, because take this scenario. Say that you're a veteran player coming back after taking a couple years off, and you don't know what the EOC is. You quit like way before it was even announced, and you don't know where the Friends tab is in the new interface system because it's like seriously the new interface system. If you're like a veteran player, it's gonna look incredibly foreign to you. You would have no idea where anything is. You would have no idea where the friends list is unless somebody were to tell you. But having a legacy mode would help ease veteran players into the game because it's familiar. It's easier to get into if you know where certain things are. So having it So maybe having it default to legacy mode for players who have not logged in, say, X amount of days since pre-EoC, with a pop-up showing changes that happen to the game, such as EoC, the new interface system, that could help bring older players into the game. It would make it a lot easier than just shoving EoC into their face with new interface system, because if you take those two together, it's going to be really hard to understand what's going on. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do, this whole legacy thing. It's like, I'm all for giving people the choice, but this is mostly just for easing players back into RS3 because a lot has changed since then. But the main point of this isn't going to bring back how it was pre-EoC because ever since EoC, there have been a lot of changes to prayer, enforcement of the combat triangle, so weaknesses do matter. There's level 90 weapons. There's changes to how gear works, where it gives life points and armor. But even aside from all those changes, the one thing that's going to be keeping the legacy mode down is that they even say this if you read through the FAQ. Um, of course, it could change. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but it probably will be. Like, say there's a scenario. Two people are fighting in some PvP combat. One person is using EoC combat, one person is using pre-EoC combat. The player with EoC combat will have stuns available, ultimates. The pre-EoC players will maybe have thresholds at best in the form of special attacks. So if they're fighting, who would win? If you say the pre-EoC player would win, why would they make a combat system that requires greater input to be inferior to one that has less input? So if they're kept on equal footing, they can't really coexist on the same server. That's not to say they can't have like separate worlds where it only allows pre-EoC combat and worlds where it's only EoC, then every other world is whichever you want to choose. That could work, but in a PvP fight, it's really hard for it to coexist. But they could do something pretty cool with this, where EoC combat can be weak early on until it gets to the ultimate abilities where it really shines. But pre-EoC combat, which it's probably famous for Dragon Claw specs, could be strong early since you have specs which could be at the power thresholds or at the start of the fight. If they do that, that could be a cool interaction between the two forms of combat. But if they try to make it just like completely balanced for both sides, I don't see how it's going to work really well. But in the FAQ, they basically said something along the lines of if you want to maximize your damage output, you would have to use EoC. But pre-EoC wouldn't be too far behind. Now, I really don't think this will entice a large amount of players from the old school community because they play for different reasons. Combat isn't the only reason for old school. There are still issues with RS3 that needs to be fixed. The sense of achievement and level progression has disappeared over the years. certain features in the game have remained broken for months, if not years. There was a time. There was a time when the EOC beta first came out where I couldn't import my save, so I tried out the birth tutorial that was in place because that was the only way to get out of birth. And it was honestly the worst tutorial I've ever played through. If I were a new player, I would have never made it out of the tutorial. I would have gave up on the game right there. Of course, now there's a different tutorial. It's called Ashdale or something. I haven't played through it, but I've mostly heard through positive things from it, so I guess that's okay. But the point still stands. This will not bring back pre-EoC combat. It will not bring it to how it was in 2012. Abilities will still exist. You may not directly interact with it, but they're still there. Next Armor and Chaotix are no longer the best weapons. As for PvP, though, it wasn't really the combat system that held the community together. It was honestly the players. It was the people you met pre-EoC, the people who ran the clans you heard of, such as Reign of Terror, DI, Kill Orgy, Jaja, Wallfarers, Frozen Fury, there's like Rising Tide, I think. There's many more, I don't remember all the names, but those were the people who kept the wilderness alive. They're the people who kept it active. But when EOC came out, there was a large amount of downtime where PvP was just too foreign to play, so people quit. It would be many months until Old School was even announced the possibility, but by then, Jagex already lost a sizable portion of their PvP community. Similar thing happened back with the removal of free trade and the wilderness in 2008. So it's not gonna bring it back to how it was. For it to go back to how it was, you would need the exact same game. But that's not the impossible part. You would need the exact same community, the exact same people who played the game, and only a small percentage of those who used to play would come back because of this. We're not the same people who used to play this game 2 years ago, so keep that in mind. I'm still going to vote yes, merely for the option, but keep in mind, be realistic about your expectations because they can't get everything they promise. It's still going to be the ESC, it's just that it might be more AFK, and it might still be the old interface system, which I still prefer, but remember, ever since the EOC, there's been releases of new weapons. Combat is different. There's armor, life points, there's weaknesses, which is a huge part. So you can't really DS somebody in mage armor and expect to hit like a 50-50. Also, damage is different now. That's going to be a weird thing to try and balance. But yeah, keep your expectations realistic. And let's see if I could get to streaming Nils to Bills. I really want to do that because um, it's a lot more fun if you just play. Like, okay, I've said this about pretty much anything. Any game can be fun if you do it with friends, which is what I plan to be doing with my Nils to Bill series. Within reason. Like, I'm not gonna go with people who have like seismics and go just leech off them and whatever. But yeah, just gonna stop rambling and say thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.